My name is Claire. I'm 39, and I'm a financial consultant. Ever since I graduated with a degree in economics, I've dedicated my life to understanding the intricacies of finance, manipulating numbers with precision, and structuring plans that unravel even the darkest mysteries of money. I always believed knowledge was the greatest weapon one could possess. However, there was one crucial aspect I neglected: the fragility of human relationships. On that fateful day, that fragility would become crystal clear to me. It was a rainy morning, and I was sitting at my desk, reviewing some documents, when my phone buzzed. My bank's name appeared on the screen, and my heart quickened. Just a simple account balance check, I thought, but a slight unease settled in the back of my mind. There's no reason to be nervous. Everything is under control. Opening the app, the sight of our joint account balance froze me. 0. A lump formed in my throat. The world around me began to fade into a blur. I knew that Philip, my husband, and I frequently discussed finances, but a unilateral withdrawal of this magnitude made it clear he'd made a decision without including me. And the only word that came to mind was betrayal. I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins. Emotions warred within me, but I was an expert at maintaining composure under pressure. Anger began to build, but it was accompanied by the rational clarity that always guided me through crises. He thought he had everything under control, but the data was in my favor. This phrase reverberated within me like a mantra, calming the storm of rage and betrayal brewing inside. What haunted me even more wasn't just the emptiness of the account, but the understanding of our relationship's fragility. Years of trust and complicity crumbled in a single digital glance. I remembered how it all began. Our whirlwind romance, the promises exchanged under the stars, and the building of a life together. But behind it all, there had been a growing number of red flags I'd chosen to ignore. I stood up from my chair, full of energy and determination. I can't act impulsively, I thought. I needed to know more. I returned to my desk and grabbed my notebook. Every detail, every conversation, every small sign I'd dismissed as insignificant before now became a piece of the puzzle that would illuminate this betrayal. The following hours were spent in meticulous analysis: account statements, Philip's emails, any data that could indicate where his money, and consequently his loyalty, was going. I remembered when he started taking more business trips, and the way his phone vibrated at odd hours of the night. Watching him, I felt his attention drifting. They were small clues, but I ignored them. Now, faced with this cruel reality, every change I'd noted became evidence that my intuition had been right. The phone rang again. This time it was a call from Philip. I hesitated for a second, but then answered. "Hey, honey. Were you by the window? Could you grab those documents I left?" His voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent that made me shudder. What I felt was a hot wave of contempt building with every word. "Sure, I'll get them," I replied, maintaining an even tone. But inside, I was ablaze. A plan began to form. I'm good with numbers, and that gave me an advantage in the game that was about to unfold. Of course, he didn't know the queen was just waiting for the opportunity to make her move. When I hung up, a cold determination washed over me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about justice, and I was about to take stock of my rights. With each passing minute, the heat of betrayal became fuel for my revenge. I would build a financial arsenal that Philip couldn't ignore. The following hours became a whirlwind of controlled emotions and meticulous analysis. With each document I examined, I not only gathered information, but also new data that fueled my resolve. Philip thought I wouldn't see what he was doing, that he could get away with it, but I was about to show him I had a much more elaborate strategy than he could imagine. The tragic irony was that as my world crumbled, a new Claire was being born. A version of myself ready to fight, who would use her auditing skills and deep financial knowledge as weapons in a battle for life or death. And looking at the statement with that alarming balance, I was actually entering the first phase of my plan. The game was just beginning. I remember how perfect everything seemed at the beginning. Our love story was a fairy tale. It captivated our hearts with laughter, plans, and promises of a future filled with light and happiness. Philip and I shared dreams, and our vision of life seemed ideally aligned. He, a charismatic executive who always excelled in his career in technology, and I, a financial consultant passionate about numbers and the art of unraveling the complexities of the market. We were the perfect team to face the world, but that same world would soon become our greatest battlefield. Over the years, the magic began to fade. What was once pure admiration transformed into a cautious game, a dance where missteps could lead to disaster. Philip started spending more hours at work. Those relaxed lunches became rare, and the windows of our home, which once opened to warm conversations, began to close with increasingly elaborate excuses. He was just busy, swamped with meetings, focused on a new project. Words that, over time, lost their luster and became a source of unease for me. I remember a small moment on a rainy afternoon that's etched in my memory. Philip came home with an expression that, in the past, I would have described as radiant. But that night wasn't ordinary. On the contrary, there was a distance in his gaze that made me question everything. I remembered how he embodied the image of a successful man, but behind his facade, there was a shadow of despair hidden behind a nervous smile. A seed of doubt was planted in my mind, and I knew I had to do something. One time, during a week of meetings that, according to him, stretched on for hours, I decided I needed answers. One night, while organizing papers in search of a report, my gaze fell upon Philip's cell phone, which he'd left on the table. Before I could think of justifications, a message notification caught my attention. "I love the way you make me feel. With you, it's a new beginning." In that instant, my heart pounded. The message wasn't from a colleague, but from his mistress. A wave of nausea washed over me, shaping two antagonistic emotions, indignation and anger. How could I have been so blind? That message was proof of betrayal. However, instead of confronting him, I decided the emotional pressure demanded a more calculated response. What did I really want? The brutal truth or a way to protect the life I had so carefully built? So I began to cultivate my strategy, grabbing every detail of his routine like an insatiable auditor. I needed to understand not only what had failed, but how I could reverse this situation. My instincts as a financial consultant began to surface. With my eyes fixed on the future, I thought, if he has a plan, I can have one too. My analytical skills with numbers became the tools to decipher what should have been a solid relationship. For every hour he spent distancing himself, I would invest my abilities in mapping a broader picture of our lives, transforming pain into determination. As weeks turned into months, the tension between us grew. Sometimes trying to have a conversation became a frustrating exercise. Other times, I simply retreated, losing hope as my thoughts became entangled in distrust. The back and forth became strange avoidance dances where one wrong step could crumble the structure we were trying to maintain. He seemed to continue our lives as if nothing was changing, while I felt sucked into an oppressive emotional burden. In one of these attempts to regain normalcy, I had lunch with him, and as I looked into his eyes, a desperate question choked my lips. "Philip, what's really going on between us?" He looked away, and that was the only answer I needed. "Everything's fine, honey. Just some problems at work," was his justification. A well-rehearsed lie. The lack of communication and the erosion of trust became the foundation of our daily lives. Sometimes, I felt like an investigator searching for clues inside our home. The conversations that once flowed were now replaced by silences steeped in discomfort. Every detail, every joint account, became weapons in a silent conflict. Over time, I woke up to a truth that was right before my eyes. Our financial life was intertwined with our emotional life. For me, money and appreciation went hand in hand. For Philip, the pursuit of status and validation dominated his actions. He was embezzling from our assets to support his new lifestyle. As this realization sunk in, I realized I couldn't allow the betrayal to drag on without taking back the reins of our lives. In the silence of the nights when I found myself alone, Reflecting on who I was and who I had become felt overwhelming. The love that once nourished me was no longer enough. I needed to find strength and clarify my position. Love had become a bargaining chip, and thus poorly filled the void that betrayal created. Time went on, and when I realized it, the creativity about to sweep over my thoughts was metamorphosing. I was finally accepting that even love could be considered a transaction, just like any line of credit, and I would never let Philip appropriate something that was mine. He had his secrets, and I was about to assemble an arsenal of information. A plan began to take shape, a mid-game strategy in a chess match where each move would be a step toward reclaiming what I had fought for so long. Yes, I was willing to fight for the truth that deserved to be exposed. And as the shadows of betrayal accumulated, the light of my own resilience began to shine. What had seemed like a dark ending was now transforming into a new beginning, in a scenario where I would not just be a spectator, but the protagonist of my own story. The week following my conscious awakening to Philip's betrayal, I transformed my office into a command center. A sense of urgency enveloped me every moment. It was as if I were keyed into the scent of fresh coffee permeating the air, propelled by adrenaline and the expectation of uncovering the truth. I needed to expose what lurked in the shadows, and this would become my new reality. I reviewed the bank statements, covering them with the full attention of my analytical gaze. With each transaction, a new piece of data emerged, and I was determined to decipher the message each number held. A withdrawal, sums transferred to unknown accounts, expenses I had no idea how to justify. The list of questions grew daily. Philip had his life carefully constructed around me, and I felt I was living the perfect charade until I discovered he was spending excessive amounts of money on something I didn't fully understand. One night, the darkness of my office seemed to engulf me, as silence weighed like a fog. The only light entering through the window illuminated the glow of the computer screen. It was late into the night, and the need to find information pushed me to examine the data repeatedly. I found the first significant clue, a substantial deposit into an account linked to an interior design firm. Instantly, I realized the name matched that of his mistress, Renata, a detail that sent a wave of furious anger through me. I knew I needed concrete and quick proof. That's when my methodical search began. I needed an ally, someone who could help me unravel what was hidden behind a respectable facade. So, I decided to seek out Lucas, a longtime friend and colleague from the financial institution where I worked. He always had a special talent for finding information as well hidden as a treasure on a map. At his office, during a lunch that served as a disguise for my request, I asked the question that was tormenting my heart. "Lucas, could you help me investigate some financial accounts? I feel I'm facing a problem that needs to be resolved before it spirals out of control." He simply raised an eyebrow, noticing the seriousness I was trying to hide. "Of course, Claire, but I need to know what exactly you're after. Dealing with finances can be tricky. Sometimes it's a dirty game." His level of commitment would be worth it. It was the opportunity I needed to begin charting the most solid path to expose Philip. "I suspect there might be some irregularities in the household accounts. I may be paranoid, but I feel like a field investigator." As I spoke, I couldn't avoid the sincerity. The tension between us increased, and inside, conflicting emotions cut like a knife. Lucas gave me a reassuring look and nodded, realizing that I truly needed this support. In the days that followed, I was constantly in touch with Lucas, and he began accessing information, each piece more revealing than the last. He shared the data and financial jargon that might seem strange to many, but to me, it was like music. When he mentioned shell corporations and nominee accounts, the realization hit me like lightning. The world I considered safe was being undermined from within. Each discovered transaction was like a fragment of a truth that was about to be revealed. During discreet meetings and furtive conversations, Lucas exposed the complexity of the situation. Philip is spending money irregularly on transfers to accounts that aren't linked to you in any way. "It seems he's trying to protect a considerable sum," he said, watching me with a worried expression. This turning point made me even more determined. I knew I urgently needed to build a solid case. I began to structure a timeline for each unusual transaction and each financial movement of my husband, segmenting information and weaving a narrative that would be impossible to ignore. However, at the same time that I felt revitalized by the discoveries I was making, a shadow of apprehension hung over me. What would the confrontation be like? The realization that he might back down if the truth became unbearable, or that he might try to discredit my authority, made me uneasy. What if I was wrong about him? The thought almost paralyzed me. But I quickly recovered. The numbers didn't lie, and I was on a mission of urgent necessity. With each advance I made, each question that formed in my mind became a search for more answers. I counted the days until the next meeting with Lucas materialized, and once again, anxiety overwhelmed me. The night before our meeting, I made additional notes in a folder I kept with rigorous organization. A veritable arsenal of evidence about what I could expect from Philip when everything was revealed. When we finally met again, Lucas brought new data. He had gained access to even more secret information and brought a series of documents detailing confirmed irregular transactions. "Claire, this is serious. You need to know what's involved. If exposed, this could have devastating consequences for him," he stated, and his expression showed more concern for me than just the case itself. At that moment, the weight of the situation hit me. What I had begun as a search for truth was now a transformative emotional battle. The bridges I was about to burn might not only be Philip's, but also those built over our years together. The love that had become a transaction was no longer enough to represent what it held in my life. And, as the light of truth began to shine through the numbers I had collected, I realized that that light would also illuminate a new path for me. I had a plan. I had the tools and resources. Now action was necessary. I was determined to confront him soon. The truth had to be revealed, and I had prepared myself for this change. I was about to reclaim what was mine, not only financially but also the dignity lost in a game I didn't choose, but which I was determined to win with all my might. The battle was only just beginning, and I wouldn't be intimidated in my pursuit of justice. The days following my last meeting with Lucas were both shattering and illuminating. Every step I took toward the truth became a dance of emotions, and the anticipation of this confrontation with Philip became a burden, but also a spark of hope. With each passing day, I pursued the truth not just as a necessity, but as a sacred mission that needed to be fulfilled. The feeling that I was about to unmask the man who was initially my love and had become my tormentor fueled my determination, but also a growing anxiety. As the sun set and the quiet of the night approached, my office transformed into one of the most sacred sanctuaries I could have. The papers and documents were meticulously organized, revealing a meticulous plot of the financial transactions Philip had tried to conceal. I was bleeding, but I felt alive. The blow of betrayal had ironically become a driving force pushing me forward. Every document that passed through my hands, every number I analyzed, seemed to cry out for justice. The night before our meeting with Lucas was particularly heavy. I couldn't turn off my mind from the constant rotation of numbers and truths. Lucas's words echoed in my mind. If exposed, this could have devastating consequences for him. The depth of the situation became increasingly clear. What am I going to do if Philip reacts badly? What if he decides to get revenge somehow? I questioned myself. I wanted to believe that, armed with the truths I had uncovered, my value had grown, but also that there was no turning back. At the cafe where we met, Lucas was more anxious than usual. He opened the folder with a firm gesture, but his expression betrayed concern. "Claire, I did a deeper investigation. You need to see this," he said, pointing to the documents he had collected. "These aren't just suspicious transfers. Some of them are directly linked to companies whose records show strong ties to Renata." My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the papers. They contained evidence of a case that was becoming more complex the deeper I delved. The chart Lucas showed me became a tapestry of connections that evidenced Philip's betrayal. It was as if a large jigsaw puzzle of lies was being unraveled before my eyes, and with each new piece that came in, the gravity of the situation became even more palpable. "Claire, Here's what I consider crucial. These assets are being hidden, and the way the records are organized suggests he's been planning this embezzlement for some time. Furthermore, there are indications that some of these transfers were designated as personal expenses instead of business expenses, which could further complicate the situation. Lucas was clearly invested in my cause, and his concerns about my emotional safety sounded more like a friend's affection than a warning. This is truly devastating, Lucas. What you're saying is that he not only betrayed me, but also manipulated the trust I had in him over the years. This is a crime. A mixture of indignation and strength began to well up inside me. It was as if the words were cathartic, a release from the shackles that had been placed not only on my feelings, but also on my future. With each new conversation we had, the dampness of the fog began to dissipate, making visible the dark landscapes where I had been lost. What if Philip tries to deny all this? What if he decides to disappear or, I sighed, get revenge through defamation? I'm so vulnerable now. The vulnerability pressed on my chest like a mortal weight. Claire, what you're accomplishing is absolutely valid. With the evidence you have, there's no way he can get away with this. And the more you prepare, the more you arm yourself for what's to come, Lucas said, looking deeply into my eyes. His firmness was a pillar for the convictions that were beginning to take shape. I wasn't just dealing with a game of hide and seek. I was facing a frontal assault on my life. In that meeting, already with more than enough information in hand, I decided I needed to transform all this into a timeline and a set of arguments. Perhaps this turnaround could shield me from all the attacks Philip might unleash. Understanding how each piece fit confirmed my position. The ruthless morality play became a logical sequence in which I could finally enter. And so, returning home, the weight of the world no longer pressed on my shoulders. Instead, I now carried a burden of justice, a beacon illuminating the path ahead. Philip had no idea that soon he would be facing a storm he couldn't avoid. And the next stage of my plan was beginning to take shape in my mind. The meeting, the revelation, and the confrontation would be significant and arduous events. But I was determined. It would be a watershed moment, the end of a cycle based on deception and mistrust. Every step took me closer to the light and further away from the shadow of betrayal. I couldn't allow myself to back down now. My convictions were firm, cemented in the irrefutable truth that emerged like a beacon amidst the darkness of so many lies. In the days leading up to the confrontation, I prepared a meticulous presentation. A summary of everything Philip had done, a timeline of events, evidence of each dubious transaction, and a clear calculation of what his behavior meant to me, both emotionally and financially. I was arming myself for the most important battle of my life, and with each passing moment, I felt the burning excitement of a woman finally reclaiming her place in the world. When the day of the confrontation arrived, I dressed with renewed purpose. The dress I chose was a reflection of strength, a symbol of the woman I had learned to be in the shadows of my suffering. I looked in the mirror and truly saw the Claire I should always have been, confident, resolute, and prepared. Philip had no idea what awaited him, and within me, there was no room for leniency. He had chosen the path of betrayal. It was time for him to face the consequences of his decisions. I was no longer just responding to an attack. I was reclaiming my life, ready to fight against the darkness that had tried to consume my soul. It was my time. I was about to make a choice that would change everything, and I would not hesitate. The battle for truth was just beginning, and now I was the commander of my own story. Finally, I would emerge from the shadows and reveal the light that had always existed within me. Morning light streamed through the living room window, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The soft thud of my heart beat in time with each thought that crossed my mind. I looked in the mirror once more and saw not just a woman, but a warrior, armed with the truth. The day of the confrontation with Philip had arrived, and I felt prepared for anything. I was determined not to let the lies continue to reverberate in my life. Philip had no idea what was coming. The initial morning, as we met for coffee, seemed almost trivial, a last vestige of normalcy that would quickly become a spectacle of revelations. Subconsciously, I felt the tension rising between us like an electric current about to snap. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from unspoken love to an emotional battlefield. "Claire, you seem pensive today. Is everything all right?" Philip's voice was a mixture of genuine concern and a hint of apprehension, but there was no longer room for the comfort it once provided. How ironic, after everything he had done. "Today is an important day, Philip," I replied, trying to remain calm. "We need to talk." The statement came out firm, but the deafening roar of emotion was about to erupt. I knew that every word spoken would be grounded in the truth I had gathered, an arsenal I had diligently compiled over the past few months. He hesitated, and the expression on his face progressed through a spectrum of emotions, from confusion to apprehension. I understood that he sensed the gravity of what was about to be revealed, but empathy had run dry, and I felt it was time to transform despair into courage. "You remember the time we spent building this life, don't you? The trust we said we had in each other? The love we respected?" I tried to open the conversation in an almost affectionate way, but I soon realized that this approach was merely setting the stage for what was to come. He shook his head, trying to respond, but the damning truth hung heavy in the air. The day we built our history together had become stratospheric, serving as a stark contrast to each act of betrayal I was now unearthing like a real-life detective. The weight of the past was now reacting with the truth I was about to reveal. "It's not just about what we built together, Philip, but about what you destroyed." The weakness in his convictions began to fade as I pulled the folder of documents from the table, like a magician revealing his final trick. "These are the statements you didn't think I'd discover. The money transfers, those purchases. Here's the evidence of your betrayal. Here, you spent our money with Renata. How can you justify all of this?" Philip stood up abruptly, his eyes scanning the papers as if searching for an escape route. "Claire, wait! You can't just interpret all this the way you want. I was within my rights to act this way." The indignation in his voice didn't come close to shaking my resolve. I knew what he was trying to do, camouflage his actions under an arbitrary defense. "No, it's not about individual rights, but about the destruction of trust between us. You used my love as a shield while you allowed yourself to sever our bond," I said, each word coming out as a cry of anger and liberation. "You thought you could manipulate me without consequences? I'm not the woman you deceived anymore." The strength in my words mirrored the recovery of emotional stages that had previously unconsciously diminished my self-confidence. "Claire, this is insane," Philip responded, his voice now trembling with a mix of desperation and hopelessness. "You can't accuse me like this without hearing my side." "Hearing your side? Your side has always been betrayal. How could you be so selfish? You were so focused on getting what you wanted that you forgot that all choices have a price." My stomach churned as I faced the pain at the depths of our relationship. The words came out loaded, revealing what, at one point, I had allowed myself to ignore. His lack of consideration was devastating. I found myself in a very different place than I used to be. Truth was no longer just a concept. It was a reality I was willing to defend. He had become the shadow of a man I once imagined to be my love. But the truth had become a weapon ready to destroy the idols I had built. "You must face the consequences, Philip. This isn't just a matter between the two of us. It's a matter of justice. You've been using our life together, our assets, to cover your betrayal. And that's unacceptable." I can explain, Claire." He sounded lost, and I realized he was about to crumble under the weight of the evidence. The intensity of the emotions swirling between us was a battlefield in itself. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about the truth emerging from the blossoming betrayal. "Explain what, Philip? That you were able to deceive and divert what was ours out of selfish greed? Do you think I can be manipulated forever? Did you think you could keep perpetrating this charade?" I was in a state of exhilaration and anger, but at the same time, I felt a growing inner peace. This was what I needed. This is what I deserved. The end of the game of lies. He fell silent for a moment, and an expression of defeat crossed his face. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done this. I didn't think you'd find out. That's exactly what you did, isn't it? You thought I'd never know." His expression became increasingly vulnerable. And for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man he could have been in an alternate universe, a man who hadn't betrayed his wife, but who seemed merely exhausted by his own cowardice. Don't you want to know what a few numbers can do to your future, Philip? You made a mistake underestimating me. And now, this becomes your ruin, not mine. You're surrounded. His head drooped, like a fighter who, at the end of a round, realized he couldn't continue. It was time to take a step forward. Once you expose all of this, know that life won't be the same, and I won't be the same woman. Trust has been broken and needs to be repaired with actions, not words. Sudden conviction took hold of me, and I realized the game wasn't for Philip anymore, but for me. You chose to go down this path. Now, you will have to pay the price. I'm no longer vulnerable to your games. As I spoke, time seemed to stop. A transformation was happening. I was revealing not only Philip's betrayal, but also reclaiming my strength lost throughout this process. With each word I uttered, I reaffirmed who I was, and that there were no more shadows covering our scene. Philip could hide no longer. He was facing the truth of his actions, and realizing that what was at stake was far greater than what he had done, a new understanding began to form in our conversation. "Claire, I can't live like this," he pleaded. "I can't have you in my life and carry all this on my shoulders at the same time. Can you give me a second chance?" This question echoed in the walls of the room, challenging the logic of the patterns I had established. A second chance? After all this? You destroyed more than a marriage, more than what we had built. You must now decide what you truly want. This isn't just a sorry that can be easily erased. The path you chose, Philip, has brought real consequences, and I'm not willing to sponsor more lies. Silence fell upon us, and for the first time, I realized the battle wasn't just a war between him and me. It was a woman's fight for truth against the shadows trying to take over her life. I knew I had fought a battle, but that its final echoes were still far off. His defense was a slow collapse under the weight of the revelation, and then I realized that this was my victory, not just over betrayal, but over all the insecurities and uncertainties that once cast a shadow over my soul. I was no longer a victim. I was the author of my story, and he could no longer deprive me of that. With one last determined look, I wouldn't allow myself to succumb to sadness in this new reality. The confrontation had produced a clear result: freedom. From now on, there would be no room for distrust. I looked at Philip, once again enveloped by the renewing force of truth. And in this tide of renewal, I stepped back, ready to face the challenges that would come. For I knew I was willing to fight for a future built on grounded truths, where trust could finally be regained, and freedom claimed its space in any new chapter ahead. The silence in the room was deafening. Philip, his gaze vacant and confused, seemed to be clamoring for an escape route. It wasn't the first time I had confronted him, but this time was different. I had been strengthened by the truth and the evidence I had accumulated. The freedom this revelation promised became the only light in my dark life. "Philip, what do you have to say about this?" I asked, my voice echoing in the room. He hesitated, but I sensed his game of manipulation was coming to an end. "Claire, I can't live like this. I can't have you in my life and carry all this burden at the same time. Can you give me a second chance?" His words were tinged with melancholy, but his vulnerability no longer moved me. "A second chance? You destroyed more than a marriage. You need to understand that your actions have real consequences, and I can no longer be complicit in your deceptions." I scanned the documents and met his gaze with unwavering firmness. The truth wasn't a burden to me, but a liberation. "Claire, that's not fair. I was just trying. You can't understand." The desperation in his voice showed he felt cornered, but I no longer cared. His words sounded hollow and distant, like echoes of a past that felt a lifetime ago. "You don't understand the price you've paid for your actions. Our relationship can no longer be sustained on lies. Today, I'm facing all of this head on. I won't be a victim of your betrayal anymore. You didn't have to do this. We could have worked it out." The frustration and helplessness in his words were no longer a form of attack. They were a marker of the truth that suffocated him. I had no more compassion to offer. He had broken our trust irrevocably. You have no idea what you've done. Look around you. Each of these papers represents the betrayal and contempt for the moments we cherished. And now, you're trying to shoulder all of this onto me as a burden? Heat surged through my veins. I was releasing everything that had tormented me for so long. Our eyes met. And there, in the center of the room, a map of our choices unfolded. The truth I had so feared was all around us. He stood before me, and I wouldn't back down. Melancholy, he shook his head, acknowledging that his attempts to circumvent the situation had failed. Claire, I can't lose you. You mean so much to me. I just didn't know how to handle everything. When I felt pressured, I sought comfort elsewhere. But I never wanted it to go this far. His eyes welled up, a flicker of remorse. But now, for me, it was too late. You lost the ability to be honest, Philip. Now you're here, saying you don't want to lose me after everything you've done. That's not love. It's a desperate confession that only intensifies the betrayal. I can't simply let it go, and I can no longer coexist with a translation of empty words. I let out, bravery echoing in my resolve. You leave me no choice. What can I do? You're really going to leave me just because of this? The disbelief in his eyes was alarming. At that moment, I could swear he was about to break. The reality of his actions made it clear he couldn't undo what he had done, and I had no reason to believe he was truly willing to do what was right. Claire, you're right to seek the truth. But that doesn't mean we have to want to see the end of all this. We can fix this. A therapist, a mediator, anything. We don't need our story to end like this. He seemed to succumb to despair as he tried to suggest a way out that left what remained of his pride intact. Wait, you think change will be possible? That the wounds you've inflicted can be forgotten with just a conversation? How could you imagine that erasing memories of pain is something that can be done so easily? I stated, the strength in my words allowing no loopholes. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was a confrontation. Philip, you have a habit of hiding from consequences. I believed, and let my love blind me to a reality that shattered before my eyes. It's time for you to face the truth you created. This is your test, and you must face it here and now. He stepped back slightly, as if pondering every word I had spoken, but the confusion and self-justification in his eyes did nothing for his intentions. He was adrift in a sea of remorse, but I couldn't allow myself to yield to his pain. I'm not going to sit here waiting for you to make a decision that brings me back into your life, as if I were an optional detail that could be discarded if you weren't competent enough to handle this. Your actions speak louder than any of your words, and they won't make me come back. With each word, I felt the certainty of his loneliness deepening. It reached a point where Philip had a choice to make. So what are you planning? What will you do with the evidence you have? Do you really intend to take this to your lawyer and move forward with everything? The desperation in his voice turned to disbelief. What he didn't realize is that this was already an inevitable reality. Yes, seeing as you've become the author of your own ruin, diverging from the promises you made to me, to our love, I am not obligated to remain at your mercy. What could be between us doesn't need to be limited to this unplanned conversation. It is indeed a matter of safety. The words came like projectiles, becoming a meaningful dialogue, a manifesto that defined not only what he had done, but what I was willing to do from this moment on. I wasn't mere rhetoric. I was the force that would reclaim my place. So go ahead, do what you deem necessary, but it won't be pain or guilt that will sustain your existence. I'm about to embark on a new journey, and you're no longer in it. Philip now looked like a man adrift, lost in his own weaknesses. There was no room for the man he once was. The vulnerability in his expression betrayed him. But there was no room for compassion. Not anymore. You're wrong if you think you get the final say in our story. I'm not the only one who's been hurt. I'm here because I love you. The final sentence echoed a declaration he didn't yet fully understand. But love couldn't be camouflaged by fraudulent actions that refused to see the light. The confrontation was unfolding in a spectacle of emotions. I watched his despair transform into a new kind of acceptance. But I couldn't be fooled by it. My life was transforming, and it wouldn't be through a fear that would become undefined. You made choices you'll now have to pay for. Paths and encounters shouldn't involve only resentment or frustrated mentions. Let's move on, with or without you. With each word, I felt I was finally reclaiming the respect I always deserved. It wasn't just the actions that would define our narrative, but also the decisions we would make in the face of what was yet to come. And as I spoke, I made it clear that time had run out. The life I had built around him could no longer be cherished. What were once shared dreams now became fragments of a reality I needed to face. I was no longer just fighting against betrayal. I was putting myself on the path of self-realization. The fight for truth hadn't ceased. It was far from over. But I was strong, close to a rebirth that wasn't limited to a love that had been lost. It was the fight of a woman reclaiming her life and her dignity. And Philip, who had distanced himself so much, now had the chance to reassess his own life and the choices he had made. I was no longer a mere figure in a chess game, but an active player. The battle was only just beginning, and my victory was a certainty. The future ahead was no longer something to be feared, but something to be desired, and I was ready to embrace every challenge that came my way. Give me proof, Claire. Tell me you won't do this, that you won't leave me, Philip pleaded, but the certainty of what I needed made his words insignificant. The time for decisions had come, and I was determined not to let any more shadows fall upon my life. The light of truth now shone brightly, illuminating a path I was willing to tread, without looking back. With each passing minute, the room became enveloped in a tense atmosphere. Philip still stood motionless, his words echoing like a lament on the walls. Meanwhile, I took a deep breath, letting the feeling of renewal settle within me. There, leaning against the table, with the briefcase open before me, I felt the determination firm and clear. The truth wasn't just a cut in my beliefs about us, but an ascension to the new Claire emerging from the darkness of betrayal. Philip, now aware of the gravity of the situation, began to move. The defense he had maintained before transformed into a search for reason, something I had longed to see. He was no longer the secure and invincible lover I knew, but a man who now saw his own fragility exposed. His eyes reflected the internal struggle between remorse and self-preservation. Claire, we need to discuss what comes next. If I've truly lost you, I don't know how to live my life. I can't handle the pain we've caused each other. Philip tried to argue, but his voice faltered, immersed in confusion and despair. For him, reality was transforming into a labyrinth from which he no longer knew how to escape. Philip, you need to understand that this isn't about pain or the need for repair. It's a call to truth. I looked into his eyes, sincerity welling up within me. For too long, I allowed you to draw our outlines. I was so involved in the lies that I lost myself. But now, I'm not only reaffirming my place, but also recognizing that I can move on. The last thing I want is to carry this for the rest of my life. He stepped back, an innate gesture of defense, as if trying to shield himself from the storm breaking in his life. I knew that the words between us were no longer mere murmurs, but real. The consequences would be inevitable, and the impact of his actions would reflect throughout our lives. There was no way to undo the past, but there was freedom in accepting reality. Claire, please. I'm a man who made mistakes, but everyone makes mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance. He continued, his voice now full of despair, but still wishing everything could return to what it was before. It was an attempt to regain ground he had already lost. It's not about a second chance. I can't rewrite a past that doesn't acknowledge my pain. The relationship we had is over, I declared, with a greater weight in the words I spoke. Your second chance needs to be tied to a new understanding, because a life of lies won't sustain itself. The heavy words hung between us, the echo of our conversation amplified by the truth now settling as a new foundation. Watching him grapple with his dilemmas, I realized that love is often an act of courage, and the courage to love myself was what I needed most in that moment. So, what do you do now? Will you leave me and move on, without even trying to understand and salvage what we had? Philip looked at me, dread growing in his eyes. He was scared, and in a way, that was a gratifying sight. Just as I had felt imprisoned in the shadows of his lies, now he was under his own weight. I'm no longer your emotional crutch. Today, I'm a woman who sets her own boundaries, I said firmly. I can't accept this in my life anymore. I can't be the woman who lets herself be swayed by empty words. My path will no longer include you, and that's the only truth I have. This revelation unfolded like a strengthening flower, promising that the transformation within me would become the strength I needed. He began to understand that the game had changed, and the anger he might once have harbored towards me had morphed into an acknowledgement of the flaw that was his life. The price he paid for his actions now hung in the air between us, a specter that could no longer be ignored. So that's it? You'd rather live your life sabotaged by lies than give me a chance to change? His voice overflowed with emotion and a desperate desire to reverse the course of events. With each word that left his mouth, I saw him sinking deeper into the abyss he had created himself. I'm not here to give you a chance, Philip. I'm here to reclaim my own worth. I've learned a very hard lesson from all of this, and what has happened will shape me as a woman. The truth about us is that we can no longer continue together. The life you chose and mine will never intersect as they did before. As he walked away, his face became an expression of pain and need. Reaffirming my position alongside a painful truth gave me the courage I needed. It's time for you to confront what you've done. I don't know if it's reconciliation you seek, but a life alongside someone who betrayed their partner won't help build a future. Turning to leave, a wave of realization washed over me. I was leaving a part of my past behind, not in the way I wished, but through the transformation that now led me to a new tomorrow. Philip would no longer have a place in my heart, and this was the first step towards rediscovering myself. As I left the house that had witnessed moments of love and disillusionment, I finally realized I was stronger. Outside, the sunlight brought clarity. I could feel there was a path ahead, full of promise and opportunity. I was determined to transform every tear and every moment of pain into positive energy that would shape the woman I wanted to be. The fight wasn't over, but now I was in control of my own narrative. I opened the door, taking a deep breath and feeling the fresh morning breeze. This was the moment everything changed. I was ready to build a new life, free from lies, dark clouds, and past traumas. The future awaited me, and I was determined not to let anyone extinguish the light that now shone brightly within me. This was my chance, a new beginning, and I was ready to embrace every piece of this transformation. The road might be uncertain, but I was determined to walk it without fear. The freedom I so longed for was finally within reach, and I was ready to grasp it.